Welcome to the first episode of the ABAT Show. Today, I'm here with special guest Felicia Abad, and we're going to be talking a whole range of politics. But first, let's get to learn a little bit more about Felicia. So, what is your age and where are you from?
I am 34. I am originally from a small town in Illinois. I grew up on a farm, and then I moved to the east coast of Florida when I was 14, where I went to high school, and then I lived in Tampa.
All right. And then getting more into politics, where do you consider yourself on the political compass?
I consider myself a libertarian. I'm actually a registered Democrat. I'm just somebody who has become very disenchanted with the party.
Okay. And then when did you first start getting into politics and why?
The first time I remember paying attention to politics was in first grade. I was home sick for a few days, and I had a TV that only had like 6 channels, and there was a Ross Perot documentary. And when I went back to school and we voted inside of like an old refrigerator box, I convinced everyone in my class that they should vote for Ross Perot, and he was the independent. And in my first grade class, he won.
Yeah. School elections are definitely something interesting before you turn 18. And then the last question before we start discussing, are there any specific topics that you feel strongly about personally that you want to discuss today?
I would like to discuss censorship in the media. I actually think that obviously what's going on in the election right now is a huge concern for everyone. But I think that censorship and the suppression of the free flow of information is a huge deal in America.
100%.
I think, that is a very slippery slope.
Yep, I 100% agree with you. And actually, that was one of the subtopics we were going to get to today. But actually, I wanted to start with I want to start on the more high controversial side of politics and talk about the idea of abortion. So
I'm going to jump right in there, huh?
Yeah, we're going to jump right in. So I don't know how you want to do this. If you want to give your stance first, and then we could start a discussion from there.
Yes, I actually have some notes because I knew you were going to throw that at me.
Okay.
My personal stance on abortion is, it's so tough. Just because my stance has evolved through my life. I think once you become a parent, it changes. To me, life begins at a heartbeat, which is not immediately.
So you don't agree with the scientific theory that life begins at conception?
No, I don't. I have had sonograms with my own children before 8 and 9 weeks. There's no heartbeat. It's just to me, if you woke up tomorrow and you didn't have a heartbeat, you would be dead.
So that's kind of where I get into this. I think that the idea of abortion starts with understanding the idea that it's scientifically proven, whether you agree with it or not, that life begins at conception. And it's been proven by many scientists. But bringing up the idea of, say, you brought up the idea that if I woke up tomorrow and didn't have a heartbeat, the fact that, so if you use that idea with abortion, you can also talk about how if I woke up tomorrow and I was in a coma, or if I was having a stroke and my heartbeat somehow just went stop, that my life should be cut and I shouldn't be given the chance to live. That's kind of what I see with that point of view.
Right.
If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying.
I think that, here's my view on abortion. I think that, I believe these are innocent children who haven't done anything that should have their lives taken from them. I think that their life and their opportunity to live and thrive is protected under the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand there's many different circumstances that abortion should occur, but my point of view is the baby doesn't. This is how to put it. I put it in simple terms. Is that I don't think the baby chooses when it's born in the womb. It doesn't choose the circumstance that it's going to be born under. Otherwise, he'd give himself an opportunity to thrive. And I think the elimination of a young baby's life that could possibly change anybody in this world's life or possibly save another human being shouldn't be denied the opportunity because one of the first topics that people bring up is the idea of rape or the idea of incest, that they say that abortion should be qualified. So that's my point of view. If you want to comment on that.
I just think I've never been in that position.
100%, yeah.
So as a Christian, it's just hard for me. I have very strong opinions about abortion in life, but again, it's hard to pass judgment on somebody who's in a situation that you've never been in. And I think when you're a guy and you don't carry a baby inside your body, it's also very different. It's just not the same.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because
where I think one of the main reasons that I have become so turned away from the Democratic Party is they just keep taking everything one step too far. And I think their stance on abortion is getting out of control. I think it's one thing to grant the woman the choice in the first trimester, although in my mind, it's only okay up until a heartbeat. But these late-term abortions that they're trying to squeak through, I think, are murder.
I 100% agree with you on that.
I mean, between 2003 and 2014, 143 infants died after being born from an abortion. These fetuses are surviving abortion, and they're trying to push through these laws to make that okay.
And I 100% agree with you on that. And you actually brought up a point that I wanted to talk about with the idea of, so obviously I'm a white Christian male, and the idea of me bringing up abortion to a lot of people, and I think this is a topic we need to get into. With the way our society has been evolved politically, it's nearly impossible to have a conversation with nearly a large percent of the population about politics and specific issues. And to me, I think that's the biggest threat to our society, the inability to talk and transfer ideas. But
you have to understand too that one of my best friends takes a very hard stance on that. She thinks that communication is the key, and that's how we work through all these things. But for generations before us, like I was raised for a long time by my great grandparents, and somebody else's politics and political views were just none of your business.
But I think we are in a society today that there's so much differential and diversity that causes trouble in our society that people need to communicate. People need to transfer their ideas. People need to understand and differ and disagree, but move on. Exactly. But
social media will never let that happen.
100%. But I was gonna transition back to the idea of abortion, because with my point of view, I personally believe that even before 6 weeks, I'm a strong believer in the idea that life begins at conception, and I don't think abortion should be allowed. Really, no matter the circumstance. I think with the case of rapists and incest, that these rapists and people that are performing incest, they should be incarcerated and charged and put to the full extent of the law. But I don't think that a baby should be killed for the circumstance that it's being born in that case, because there's a lot of people with
what about medical necessity,
like causing harm to the mother if she gives birth. That's where I believe that. See, I think that because do you know the effectiveness of a C-section? Do you know the actual number of how?
Say that again?
Do you know how effective that a C-section is? Do you know the rates at which it actually causes harm to the mother?
No, I know it's more dangerous than traditional birth.
Well, actually, from last year, with the amount of C-sections, there was a 99% survival rate of C-sections. And I think that that's the solution. And if it really is a case that a mother will die on the spot if she tries to have the baby, then it could be up to question. But here's what I see. I see people who go out and they have sex and they do it irresponsibly with no contraceptive, no protection, and have a baby, and they don't want to own up to their mistakes. I feel like that happens the majority of the time. And that gets me to the idea of Planned Parenthood. And I'm just going to read you a couple numbers right here.
So what would be, hold on, before we move over there. So what would be your stance on an ectopic pregnancy? That's not something a C-section can fix. The egg stuck in the tubes. The mother will almost certainly die.
And see, that when it's a complicated idea of birth, I think that should be put up to question. I think that maybe that should be the only circumstance. But if the mother's truly in danger, then it could be evaluated by doctors. But in a case where she can have the baby perfectly fine, but she doesn't want to have the baby, that 100% that the baby should not be taking its life. And
so if it's up to the doctors and not the mother, if I am pregnant with an ectopic pregnancy and I have 3 other kids at home and there's still a substantial risk to my life, I'm supposed to let that doctor then decide whether or not how great the risk is?
I think the doctor should evaluate, because in the end, the doctor's the most medically informed, and he should be able to make a decision whether or not that if you could have the baby successfully, or if it endangers your health, then you can possibly have an abortion. But the fact that, the doctor should medically make a percentage and show you the numbers and give you the choice, but also give you a proper evaluation and push for you to have a baby, unless your death rate would be above 75%, then it should be pushed by the doctor. But I'm just gonna push some numbers towards you to further this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2016, according to the CDC, there was 623,471 legally induced abortions in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
This also brings up my. They reported 186 abortions per 1,000 live births. So more than 10% of babies being born and 1,000 lives were being killed. And this brings me to the idea of Planned Parenthood. In 2019, Planned Parenthood gave a total number of 672,000 number of abortions, medical and surgical, in the year 2019. That equals out to 6,300 abortions a week. 6,300 babies being killed in a week. That number to me is absolutely preposterous and immoral. And this is where I turn my point of view on abortion. Do you take a guess on how many adoption referrals out of those 345,000 adoptions just through Planned Parenthood, the company of Planned Parenthood? Guess how many adoption referrals occurred in those 345,000?
How many they referred to adoption?
Yeah, out of those 345,000 cases.
0.
No, it was 1,800. But 1,800 to 345,000, that is an significantly smaller number. And this is where I push my view on abortion to help qualify it. Because some people may say, this is where people bring up the idea of my body, my choice. But also, and that's what I was going to get into earlier with my perspective of being a white Christian male, that people see my view as ineffective and I don't get a stance on the issue, which I think is absolutely preposterous. It's America. We all have views on everything. And that's where I push the idea of if it's your body, your choice. But you also got to think, say I am the father of a woman who wants to get an adoption. Isn't that technically my baby, my choice too? But nobody ever wants to bring up that idea. I understand it's a woman.
Right. You said adoption. Did you mean to say abortion?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
You said adoption. Did you mean to say abortion?
Yeah, I meant to say abortion. But I hope you see where I'm coming from with the idea of that. If they want to push the idea of my body, my choice, and it's not something that should be a political thing. It's something that should be a moral thing. The fact that these babies that could change our world someday and save lives should not be taken under the circumstances they are born. And let me just throw this last number at you. The ratio of adoption referrals to abortions in 2019 was 1 per 124. And that also pushes the idea of that the way to save babies in our country is to fix the adoption system. I'm pretty sure you're 100% agree with me on this, that our adoption system is completely screwed up in this country.
Yeah,
the fact that
we're an international adoption company.
Exactly. And the amount of parents willing to adopt children to the number of children actually being adopted is the ratio is out of this world. And the reason is because the adoption system is extremely expensive, extremely time worthy, and the way to save babies' lives is to fix our adoption system, which we have the money to make it easier with how much spending came from President Donald Trump's term. But I've been talking, so I'll let you go.
There's so many things tied into adoption. You have lawyers, you have social workers. My degree is in social work. You have the social workers that are performing the home studies and the background checks. And now you're asking social workers to go out there and be police officers, and there weren't enough of us in the first place.
100%. And
so, it's just crazy. It's crazy how much an adoption costs. It's crazy all of the red tape that somebody who wants to take care of an unwanted baby has to cut through. It's just, I mean, you're definitely onto something there. Adoption is, I think, a pathway out of abortion.
100%. And that's what I think people don't see this point of view because, so I'm just going to bring up an example, personal example. There's my school and a lot of the people I'm around in my area are strongly to the left side of the political spectrum. And they see the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court as a pathway for abortion to become illegal in this country. And however much that I push for pro-life views and that abortion shouldn't be allowed, that's something that I'll get to politically to get more into politics, that I think that will never happen in our country. I think that Republicans, I don't think there's enough political people on the right who have such a negative view on abortion to actually push this idea through. And that's what I just wanted to get into. I wanted to get into, do you have anything else that you want to bring up on abortion? Or
my personal opinion is that that will never happen. I don't think Roe versus Wade will ever be turned over. I just don't. I understand why it was legalized in the first place. When abortion was not legal, you had desperate mothers and teenage girls seeking out, you know, for lack of a better term, because there was no Google at the time, Google doctors in somebody's basements with a butter knife and a coat hanger. So the question became, do you want to be responsible for the death of one life, or do you want to be responsible for the death of two lives?
Exactly. And I've heard this point's actually got pushed to me by a lot of people, surprisingly. The fact that, so I was talking to a person who's actually politically on the right, but has a very pro-choice view on abortion. And they brought up the idea to me, which sounds like a radical idea, but it's also been brought up by many people that if abortion is made illegal in this country, which I 100% agree with you, I don't think Roe versus Wade will ever be reversed. But they brought up the idea that if abortion is made illegal, as all these crazy methods of what you said, I'd be referred to as the Google doctor, all these crazy methods of killing babies at home. And in my opinion, these people that are killing babies this way, if abortion was made illegal in this country, which I don't think will happen, but you never know. But I think that these people should legally be prosecuted to the full extent, because I think that is beyond abortion. In my opinion, that is immorality and, in my opinion, disgusting. But I'll let you speak on that one more time if you want.
I just think, again, I've never been in a position like that. And as a Christian, I can't pass judgment on somebody who's in a situation that I've never been in. Now, the situation I have been in is that my own parents are 15 years older than me. They chose to have me, which today I'm grateful for. But I had a childhood that I was not grateful for. And until I was 13, if you would have asked me if I would have been better off if my mom had an abortion, my answer would have been yes.
And that's what I think the sad reality of our world is today. The fact that people don't own up to their, if they weren't trying to have a baby, for example, and I think it's the idea that should be preached to you as a young child, owning up to your mistakes. You have say I got a girl pregnant, and we decided to have the baby, and especially me, because I put a young girl in so much danger, and I put so much strain on her life. I think especially the men in the relationship need to step up and own up to their mistakes and economically provide, just give which in our country is an amazing thing because there's so many economic opportunities for people to thrive. And I think that they should own up to their mistakes and provide an economic stability for their, and I know that's hard.
That comes down to, I mean, the things that you're talking about men stepping up and both parties making the right decisions, that all comes down to the strength of a nuclear family behind those people. I mean, you could argue that the breakdown of the nuclear family is the reason for these numbers.
100%.
You know, I had a great dad who adopted me later in my life. And for a while, when I was an older teenager, maybe I was a junior or senior, I don't remember, my dad told me how proud he was of me. And he told me there was nothing I could ever do to make him not proud of me. And he said, if something were to happen, and you were just a great mom your whole life, I would still be this proud of you. Not many people's parents say that to them. So when something happens that's not planned, I am sure there is like an immediate panic. I mean, these people some of them come from great homes, that's true, but a lot of them come from abusive parents, no parents, worst case scenario. I don't know how somebody would feel without the backup that I had, and neither do you.
Mm-hmm. And 100%. I think that's where point of view comes into this situation. But I actually have another number here. That it's kind of a racial background breakdown of abortion. That 40% of the abortions that happened in 2019 were from the Black community, with 29% of them being from poverty infilled areas, with with 36% also being Caucasian females, and then the rest broken down as a minority. But I think that's where it comes in that I don't really see it as a piece of legislation that could really provide these people to gain moral opportunities, and grow as a person. But it's a topic that in my opinion,
those things, growing morals and the things that you're talking about, those things need to come from home. We need to stop placing that responsibility on our government. We have to stop trying to get someone else to raise our children. Nobody's going to pass a law that makes your kid grow up to be a responsible adult.
100%.
That comes from you.
And yeah, I feel, in my opinion, abortion's a topic that will ever be solved in our country. I think there'll always be a debate, just like a lot of other issues. But I'm going to try and move on to the next topic just so we can get as much information as we can in, if that's good with you.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, so the next topic I was going to bring up was actually the idea of immigration. I was specifically going to talk about the southern border. With obviously our current case with the election, it looks like Joe Biden will be taking office unless proved differently in the Supreme Court. So what's your view on the southern border wall that Trump's began construction on? And we'll start from there, and we'll move from there. So what's your view on the southern border wall that Trump began constructing on the border of Mexico?
I think it will definitely detour people. It will definitely slow them down, but I don't know if it will put any substantial dent in the amount of people that are trying to come to this country. I don't know if you can, as a parent, nobody could discourage me from hurling my body over a wall to give my kids a better life.
So do you view this illegal immigration coming from the southern border, do you view it as a threat to national security?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
Because it's not just, I don't even know if I can say primarily, but it's not just families coming over here looking for a better life. It's the cartel. It's
the drug trafficking, the human trafficking. And actually, I was going to bring this up.
It's endless. We have to be able to regulate that. And we can't, I know it sounds horrible and cold, but we can't just let everybody in. If we let everybody in, then everybody would stop wanting to come here because this wouldn't be America. And we have lists, millions of names long, of people waiting to come into this country the right way. And that is not fair to them.
And that's something that I'm going to get into. But I was going to read you a couple. So basically, my view on the southern border wall, I think that the construction of it is something that was needed for our country. The amount of, especially in the beginning of Trump's first term in 2016, the amount of illegal immigration coming through the southern border and the amount of danger it was causing to our national security was through the roof. And I think just the construction of it, I think it's slowing it down. 100% I agree with you that it won't eliminate all illegal immigration, but it will slow it down. And the reason I believe this, and the reason I think it's a threat to national security, is because you enhanced this idea earlier, that more than 86% of those arrested by ICE who basically stops illegal immigration or attempts to stop illegal immigration had criminal conviction or pending charge. And 70% of illegal immigration going through the border, this number to me is just outstanding. And this is from this is from ICE.gov. It's a true number. 70% of illegal immigration going through the southern border is either a form of human trafficking, child trafficking, or drug trafficking. To me, this is like the view in my mind, this is absolutely immoral. The fact that kids are being trafficked and drugged into our country, it's an extreme threat to national security. And this is where I believe that the idea of the building of the Southern Wall was a very effective plan by Donald Trump. And I believe that with the election of Joe Biden and the possible cancellation of the southern border wall makes our government extremely counteractive and retroactive. The fact that he comes in this country, or he becomes president. I'm going to get into a little bit about Trump here. He comes into this presidency as not as a politician, somebody from the outside who he describes many times in the beginning saw the corruptness and brokenness in our country, and as a true American, he wanted to fix that. And this is personally why I love Donald Trump as a president, because he came in and he made a difference. Everything he preached on in the beginning when he was running, he did. And do I wish he could have 4 more years? 100%. But this is what I believe the ineffectiveness in our election system is, because so before Trump, we had Obama. Whatever Obama put in, whether I liked it or not, Trump came in and canceled it out. And whatever Trump did in his terms, Biden's going to come in and cancel it out. Our government is extremely counteractive.
Well, no one talks about, granted, there was no wall, right? And no one talks about the deportation rate that Obama had. It was not small.
It was not small.
He just didn't talk about it. And everybody thinks that Trump is this horrible person who's rounding up illegal immigrants in this country and shipping them out, when that's all of our presidents were doing. I'm pretty sure, and you can fact check me on this, I'm fairly certain that Obama deported almost 3 times as many immigrants as Bush did. And they were both 8-year presidents.
Yeah, and that's what I see, because I believe he put that as a main focus on his campaign in 2016 for a reason, in order to gain more popularity, which politically was a very strong move in my opinion. And do I think it could have helped, especially with the stance that everybody was taking at the specific time? I feel now it's kind of toned down a little bit, but the stance that everyone was taking about all these people coming into our country, taking our jobs. Listen, I'm all for diversity and immigration in our country. I believe that's what makes America such an amazing country, is the diversity and opportunity. But when people come in illegally and skip the path of citizenship, which I'll get into in a second, I think that I don't think they should be coming and taking jobs of hardworking Americans, but I do think they should be given a path to citizenship. And here's what I put out there. If we check at all these illegal immigrants that are coming into our country and they don't have a criminal background, we put them on a path to citizenship, because, or if anything, if we
100%, I think we should take everybody who's here right now,
and we should do a background
check them,
100%,
give them a path to citizenship so they can get real jobs, pay real taxes.
But the second that their criminal record pops up, that's when we send them out, because if they provide wealth and economic success to our country, they 100% can stay. If they grew a business, they have a family, and they're promoting American values, they can stay. But the second that they're smoking weed or selling drugs or human trafficking, child trafficking, anything, they're gone. And that's what I believe.
Well, I think if you are a citizen of this country and you're taking part in human trafficking, you should also be deported somewhere.
Oh, 100%. I also think you should be legally prosecuted to the extent of the law, which some people don't agree with, but we won't get into that right now. But the path to citizenship is also something that I want to talk about, and I kind of use this as like a similarity to the idea of abortion. With the adoption system that needs to be fixed, our path to citizenship also needs to be fixed. I know many kids in my school right now, being at a private school with a lot of international students. One of my friends, she's actually from Canada, and she has her green card, but she's been pushing for a path to citizenship. I think she's been in my school since 6th grade, and she's still pushing for a path to citizenship. The amount of money, the time to become a citizen in this country is ridiculous. And just like the idea of the adoption system that needs to be fixed, the path to citizenship also needs to be lessened, because it promotes more, not just economic opportunity, but diversity in our country, which makes our country so strong. So if you want to comment on that.
No, I 100% think, I mean, it's crazy what we put people through who have sometimes been in this country for 5, 10, 15 years. I remember when we were in New York in February, we were watching the local news, and they had rounded up some guy who had been here for like 18 years, had a family, had kids, had the same job for 12 years. Like, what? First of all, it takes money to deport somebody. When I was in school and I read a paper on it, I think it was like $16,000. That's how much it takes to deport one person, or that's how much it took 6 or 7 years ago when I was in school. And then the rate of recidivism of somebody coming back into this country is 3 times. The average person we deport comes back 3 more times.
And that's something
So
that
that's another system that needs to be fixed. I mean, the amount of money that we spend on things that seem to have, simple solutions. Not simple, but could be.
it can be resolved.
Could be slowed down.
Exactly. And I actually want to make a diversion here, because you brought up the idea of this man in New York who lived here for 18 years, worked for 12 years, had a family, brought economic success to the country. A lot of people on the left and some people on the right, I don't think it's really a political thing. I think it's a moral thing, might view this as maybe like systematic racism, or they might view it as like a racist view. So I'm just going to bring in this idea. Do you believe that there is systematic racism in our country?
Yes, I do.
And in what forms do you believe that this occurs in the strongest?
Like what institutions do I believe it occurs in?
Yeah. Do you think? Okay, I'll. Sorry, that was a badly phrased question. Let me ask you this.
Okay.
Do you think? All right, so we'll dive into the hot topic of, obviously. So with the election, we all know that there's still protesting going on in our country, and we all know that this started a couple months ago, or it's been going on for years. The idea of protesting systematic racism in our country has been going on for years. But recently it sparked up with cases such as George Floyd, Mr. Arbery, or Breonna Taylor, all these different cases. Do you think, so I don't know how I'm going to phrase this. So let's dive in. Actually, I want to dive in personal into each of these individual cases. Do you think, what do you view on the idea of the George Floyd case?
I can't, well, one, I don't identify with racism, obviously, because I am a white female. But I also can't turn someone into a martyr with the kind of past that he has. He held a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach while his friends robbed her. In my opinion, if he was white, we would just be calling this karma.
100%. And I believe that
nobody would be yelling for him. Nobody would be chanting his name.
Nobody would be burning down cities.
If I let one of my kids walk around touting some person who has held a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach. It's not going to happen. Exactly. And I don't think it has nothing to do with what color he is, and it has everything to do with my beliefs.
Exactly. And that kind of makes me bring up a couple of ideas. The fact that I think there is racism in our country. I think there's racism in every country. And I don't think that it's specifically completely against blacks. I think there's racism from blacks against whites. I think there's racism from whites against blacks. I think there's extreme amount of racism towards Hispanics and extreme amount of racism towards Asian people. It's all around our country. And you're never going to be able to stop racism. People are always going to view each other as inferior.
Somebody said to me a couple months ago, and this was after they said it, I thought about it for a long time. And it might be one of the most intelligent things I've ever heard anyone say. They said, you will never eliminate racism. Never. You can protest, you can scream it from the rooftops, you can throw everybody in jail who has ever had a racist thought, but you will never eliminate racism, because there is no civilization on this planet that has ever eradicated stupidity.
Exactly.
And that's what racism is. Racism is stupidity. And there is not a single country on this planet that can get rid of stupidity.
And I 100% agree with you on that. I don't think the idea of racism will ever go away. But I do believe specifically that the immersion of like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, I believe these groups that are fighting for this equality, that really okay, so I'm going to bring up the idea of the police force. Now, push for the idea that all cops are bad. And in my opinion, I think there are some bad cops. But I do believe that there is extremely amazing cops in our society. And the fact that people in the Black Lives Matter group, and this might give me some hate, but this is my point of view, the fact that people in the Black Lives Matter community can go around burning cities that we built, that our country's been building, and take away people's jobs and loot and steal and violently protest, it disgusts me. It really does. Because that's not, you want to cause, so we'll talk about in the case of George Floyd, you want to make sure George Floyd's name's heard, whether or not you liked him or not. And that's what they push. They want George Floyd's name to be heard. They want the racism to stop. Well, they don't understand that racism will truly never stop, but they shouldn't be burning down cities, in my opinion,
Correct.
and everything they do. And that also makes me want to bring up the idea of, so there's three main cases that I think about with recently, and that's the case of George Floyd, the case of Mr. Arbery, and the case of Breonna Taylor. I don't think that the case of George Floyd was truly interpreted correctly with the history of his background and the circumstance of the case. Do I wish that he would have died? And do I ever impose that on anybody? Absolutely not.
No.
But the fact that with his background, I don't think people should be in the streets protesting his name. Mr. Arbery, that's a different story. He was
100%. When the Ahmaud Arbery case happened, fairly close to where we live, I was like baffled. Like I just remember hearing it on the news and thinking, what? What do you mean these people started chasing him and shot? Like, I just remember not believing it was real and kind of wondering why nobody was making a bigger deal out of it.
100%. And I think that
when this, the George Floyd thing happened and the Breonna Taylor, I was like, no, this is what we all should have been doing during the Ahmaud Arbery case.
But
that is a real case of blatant racism. And I remember, and I'm going to go ahead and stereotype, I remember when they showed the side-by-side picture of the two men who went after them, I just remember looking at the TV and thinking, if someone asked me to draw a picture of what I think a racist looks like in my mind, that's what I would have drawn.
100%. And we won't, I think that in our society, you have to be careful what you say.
Mm-hmm.
There are crazy people out there, but I'm going to get back towards the idea of the cases. The fact that Mr. Arbery was a man who was running peacefully, chased down and killed by these call them two white supremacist people.
Right.
100%. And I think that 100% that his name wasn't preached enough, like Breonna Taylor, whose name is still being preached, or George Floyd. He was a man who was innocently killed. But that gets me in the case of Breonna Taylor. The Breonna Taylor case is iffy to me. I once again, I don't wish the death of anybody in this type of way, but you also have to look at it. She was inside a house that was being investigated for drugs. And the fact, and the whole...
She knew who her boyfriend was.
She knew who her boyfriend was, exactly. She got herself in that situation, put herself in that danger, and the fact that people protest her name for someone who has such a poor background and George Floyd put a gun to a pregnant woman's stomach. His name should not be being preached in the streets. Breonna Taylor is a female who is associating herself with drugs. Do I wish the death on either of them? No.
Right.
Do I agree with either of their actions? Absolutely not. But their name should not be being preached in the streets because they were not perfect angels. And they got themselves into situations that eventually got them killed. And people who preach Breonna Taylor's name saying get justice, the police officers were doing their job, in my opinion. And obviously, in the end, the cops were the only charge the cops received was a misfire causing damage to the neighbors. And I don't know if you want to comment on the Breonna Taylor case.
Well, I know there's a lot of discrepancies in whether they knocked and whether they announced themselves. She was somebody's daughter. I can't ever imagine losing a child. I just can't. It's awful. But again, we tell our kids, and I mean we as in all mothers.
Well, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to make this point before I forget it. Don't you, with the case of abortion, and I'm not saying this to target you, but you talk about the idea of you can't ever imagine losing your daughter. And a lot of people, I'm sure there's a million tons of people with the same view as that they can't ever imagine losing their daughter. Mm-hmm. And this just brings me back to the idea of abortion, that people can't comprehend the idea of losing their daughter. Why can't they comprehend the idea of losing their daughter when it's before she's born? You know?
I think I can say I can't comprehend the thought of losing my daughter because I'm already a parent. I think if you're not a mother and you've never had a child, you can't, it's not a feeling that you understand.
Until the baby's born?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I think that a mom who has a child and then gets pregnant again and maybe decides she can't afford it, or it's some kind of circumstance that she feels that she needs to get out of it? Does she have a different kind of feeling afterwards than somebody who has an abortion, who's never had a child? 100%. I have talked to people who have been in that situation, and the guilt that they feel afterwards is more penalty than you could ever inflict on them.
Yeah. And I believe these are all touchy topics that people could debate and argue in our country, but
where I was going with the Breonna Taylor thing is that this is why we as parents, and you're a teenager, so I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, this is why we say you are who you hang out with.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what your grades are. It doesn't matter if you are a successful paramedic. It doesn't matter that you just got accepted to nursing school. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters was that you were hanging out with a drug dealer who was wanted by the law, who used your address as residence, who then was arrested and never even asked about you. Like, that's not worth losing your life for.
And once again, I think this goes back to the idea of the moral values that we can't really put legislation towards.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually going to move on to with this idea that, like, we talk about these things with the different points of view on these cases that people preach throughout the streets. And I want to diverge to the idea of the censorship in the media, because I know that's something you wanted to talk about earlier. So what is your personal view on our current society's media, whether it's political or what articles you can read on the internet? What is your personal view on the censorship in the media?
My personal view is that we are headed straight towards communism, and it will hit us like a brick wall. The censorship, like I said previously, in my opinion, is a bigger deal than who is president. I mean, censoring the White House press secretary for retweeting a published, verified article about Joe Biden is, I can't even fathom that we live in a country that would shut down someone's account for doing nothing but sharing proven information. I mean, that's crazy.
And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but so during the I think it was November 1st, every tweet that Donald Trump put out up until now, and it's still currently going on Twitter, every tweet that he's putting out, I can pull it up on my phone and show you. Every post that he is putting up has been taken down by Twitter, saying that it is considered biased or misleading information,
right?
Whatever he posts. But if you go to Joe Biden's page, nothing is being taken down or censored. And if you're looking that up, if you literally go, it'll literally say you can't see the post. So there's some you may be able to see, but if he's posting anything right now, it's considered biased or misleading information. And I think this is.
I did know that.
You did know that?
I was actually looking for something else I wanted to bring up. Yeah, the other day, Mark Levin tweeted, and Kayleigh McEnany is actually who posted this. So Mark Levin tweeted, "Reminder to the public and state legislatures, you have the final say over the choosing of electors. Not any board of elections, secretary of state, governor, or even court. You have the final say. Article 2 of this federal constitution. So get ready to do your constitutional duty." He did not say anything that wasn't true. He is literally
reading from
reciting the article and what their roles are going to be when this plays out. Twitter blocked his tweet for reciting Article 2, but the leader of Iran can tweet calls for Israeli genocide, but Mark Levin cannot cite the U.S. Constitution. There is a problem with that.
100%. And in my opinion, this might sound a little bit biased, but I think this censorship, I think it goes both ways. But I really believe it's strong censorship from the left. And that's why I believe that our country is leaning way more towards socialism and eventually towards communism and extreme left. I'm going to bring up a current case.
Censorship is really what has pushed me to the right. Because to me, it's the scariest thing that has transpired.
And this is what I believe that the misleading information is what causes so many kind of false and altered opinion. Everybody has the right to their opinion. That's what makes America such a great country. But
but these platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they are platforms. They're not publishers. They technically don't have the right. I could say the grass is blue and Hillary is Hitler reincarnated, and they're not a publishing company. They actually don't have a right to take that down.
And actually, I was going to get into that something. Have you ever watched a documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma?
I have.
And you know what they talk about, the negative effects of social media. It's a really negative towards. They bring up, for anybody who watching this who doesn't know, The Social Dilemma is a documentary where they bring up users and creators of social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. And they bring about the addictive personalities that they bring towards these social medias and the monopolistic values that these platforms bring. And I believe, although I don't believe or agree with most of what they say in the documentary, I believe that the addictive personalities of humans as people in our society is not truly the company's fault. They created algorithms and platforms that are successful.
Right.
And they could be negatively looked on upon that, but that's what I believe in strongly in free market capitalism, and these people should be making growth and profit and beneficial off this. And this brings me back to the idea of censorship by the media. These people there's so much false information in our country, and I 100% agree with you. In my opinion, it's disgusting. The fact that I was going to talk about obviously Trump is going to push his election loss to the Supreme Court with all the idea of voter fraud. And if you look up anything about voter fraud, anything about possible cases of voter fraud on the internet, it is.
You have to go to a dark website to find anything.
Anything that's true. And that's going to be on page 57 of Google that nobody's going to go to.
Right. Facebook just called for a mass, people just called for a mass exit from Facebook on Friday the 13th, I think. I think we'll be successful. I think a lot of people will leave. And I also think what we're going to see is a mass exodus of our dollars from those types of companies. I think people are really going to start paying attention to where they spend their money and the responsibility that those companies are taking for what's happening.
And I 100% agree with you on that. I was going to get into the idea about the constitutionality of these medias, the fact that we have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, but we really don't. And and I believe that and the inability for people to have a political conversation and disagree in our country, I think these are the two biggest things that are causing harm to our country.
Our country is supposed to be the melting pot, but not the melting pot of opinions.
Exactly. And I think that if we don't, as people, and it hurts me to say this, but the generation that I'm growing up in, I thought there's a lot of people who see this as a problem as well as I do. And hopefully more people do, but there's a lot of disagreement in my generation, and the amount of arguments and the inability to have a conversation, if it doesn't change, as well as the censorship of the media for people to actually view correct information and make a valued opinion, it's just going to cause downfall in our country.
Yeah. I think that kids your age and younger, I think it almost becomes like a weird thing talking about taking away these sites because you have such unrestricted access to the internet at such a young age. I mean, some of these kids are on these sites as young as 10, 11, 12 on their iPads for hours at a day because both their parents are working or whatever the situation may be. You're literally talking about restricting what's raising these kids.
And I think that's something that our country as a whole, whether you're on the left, the right, in the middle, that's something that people need to unite on. And whether or not Trump gets his reelection to the presidency or Biden becomes president, that's something that either candidate needs to promote. I believe that the unification of our country for the next 4 years, whoever serves this term, will determine whether we are successful as a country or whether we go back down,
Yeah.
downfall.
I think that there is a very, I know it's obvious that there is a very tight relationship between the left and big tech. And I don't think that Joe Biden is going to do anything to rein in these companies, let alone repeal 230, which obviously needs to be done. These companies need more regulations. They need to be more responsible for the things that they're putting out into the world. They need to be responsible for the people and the age groups that they're targeting on purpose. And no one is holding them accountable because everybody has their hand in the wallet.
So I partially disagree with you on that, and I'm going to state why. So you say that these companies need to be putting restrictions on what they put out. And as much as I want to agree, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Do you believe that's going to infringe on the Constitution?
No, because they're already infringing on the Constitution.
They're
already restricting the freedom of speech, freedom of information.
But so you don't think putting regulations and legislation on these companies isn't going to infringe on the Constitution?
No.
Okay, well, see, I think that's something that I saw in the Social Dilemma. They didn't personally push the idea of they promoted the idea of legislation and regulations on these companies but in a different manner, not of promoting false information, but for protecting the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this as, I'm a strong believer in the Constitution. And I believe that, especially looking at so many Supreme Court cases, I believe that something like this just would never truly happen. Mm-hmm. As much as I want it to, I don't think that it's constitutionally regulated. I don't think that these companies are going to be able, as much as I see them as monopolistic and how much they take over our country, I don't think that they're going to be able to place regulations on them under the Constitution. I think that any Supreme Court judge that sees this would just like, have you ever heard of U.S. versus Alvarez?
Yes.
With the Stolen Valor Act. Yeah. As much as morally you want to put regulations on them, they're not valued under the Constitution with how it's written out. Mm-hmm. Or let's say U.S. versus Lopez with the Gun-Free School Zone Act. As much as guns shouldn't have been allowed in school, which I actually just found out that there is no Gun-Free School Zone Act that protects guns from being brought on campus. There's actually no written legislation for that in Florida. And as much as it's a moralistic value that you want to be changed, it's not regulated under the Constitution. And that, I believe, no matter what the Supreme Court is divided into, I think that's something that they'll all view under the Constitution. And with bringing that up, I want to get into the idea before we kind of wrap this up about the candidates. Obviously you say you're leaning more to the right on the political compass. What do you personally believe Joe Biden, how effective do you think Joe Biden will be if he retains the presidency?
About as effective as he's been for the last half a century.
And I 100% agree with you on that. I'm just going to talk about this a little bit. I was kind of looking at it, and you brought this up earlier, how much our country is leaning towards communism. Mm-hmm. And I believe that a lot of these Democratic candidates, obviously Bernie Sanders is an open socialist. I believe Kamala Harris is a socialist. Amy Klobuchar, socialist. The only person that I see from the Democratic primaries that somewhat knew what he was talking about and didn't prove himself as a socialist was Pete Buttigieg. And I believe that, and I don't think he would ever get elected this nomination because he was gay. And the fact that that's not accepted in our country
was the best candidate that they had. 100%. How Joe Biden became their person is beyond me. Anybody who watched the Democratic debates between all the Democratic candidates, Joe Biden wasn't even third. I mean, he wasn't. If you didn't know him to be the former vice president, you wouldn't have paid attention to him for more than 3 seconds.
Yep, and that's exactly what I see that as. I think here's what my view on it. I think personally that Pete Buttigieg didn't gain any. I mean, I bet you money he gained support during the Democratic primaries because he seemed as an extremely smart individual.
I think that I had already left. That I know I have already left the Democratic Party at that point. I would already consider myself a libertarian. And when I watched that debate, I thought that is somebody who could draw me back in. Mm-hmm. So you can't convince me that I'm the only person who felt like that. I felt like I mean, he just schooled everyone. He was smarter than everyone. He was more informed than everyone. He was quicker than everyone. I mean, talk about election interference. I mean, didn't he win Iowa for like 5 minutes and then it was taken away?
Yeah. And
that's crazy.
And that's something that I think that I personally
you don't win Iowa in this country. You don't win Iowa in a primary and then disappear into the shadows. That doesn't happen.
And that's what I think, the integrity of the election. I believe that, like we talked about earlier, I just think that there's so much corruption in our election. And I think
I was listening to an interview today from a lawyer, and she was saying that Dominion, the software that's used for the election, sorry, I wrote it down over here because I thought I was going to forget. Actually, I didn't write it down, but so I'm going to try to recall it on my own. Dominion, the election software that was used, is the CEO of Dominion is Nancy Pelosi's former person, chief of staff. Her former chief of staff is now the CEO of the software that we use to vote. And Dianne Feinstein's husband is a major shareholder in Dominion. Like, I mean, shame on Trump too, because who the hell didn't catch this?
Exactly.
Who did not see this as a conflict of interest?
Personally, I think that this topic of the integrity of the election in the presidential debates, obviously we know they weren't the most successful debates, but personally, I believe that was a topic that was extremely overlooked. And now with going through the election process and seeing how much corruption and fraud, I believe that in the end,
in the interviews leading up to the election, in the separate interviews where they would interview Trump and then interview Biden because there was a virus and now there's not a virus, they didn't even ask Joe Biden how to spell his name. Yeah. That was crazy. To me, that is mainstream media not giving a crap. I mean, that is flagrant. That is in your face. That is, we're just going to hold his hand all the way to the finish line. And I don't care if the Republican sitting president was Donald Trump or George Bush. It doesn't matter how the people felt about them. What matters is people are interviewed equally. Mm-hmm. You cannot push someone's wheelchair over the finish line. That's crazy. I mean, it was so flagrant. I could not believe that people from both parties were not screaming.
Exactly. And I think that was a topic that was extremely overlooked. And but yeah, I'm going to get back to the idea that we were talking about with Pete Buttigieg, with him during the primaries. I believe that he was the smartest person in the Democratic primary, in my opinion. But you said something earlier that I extremely agree with, that the Democratic Party in our country is turning more into socialism, and eventually is going to be a threat with communism. And the amount of censorship from the left, the amount of fraud, I believe that in the future, our election, which if it isn't somehow stopped, which I can't preach for and say that I know a solution to solve this corruption equally in order to retain democracy. Because if you really want to do this, here's what I would say. You get rid of mail-in voting completely.
100%. If you cannot control mail-in ballots.
Exactly.
Which raises the question of, I mean, to me, a year ago, if somebody said this to me, I would have said, that is like complete conspiracy theory. We live in America. You're crazy. Mm-hmm. But the timing of COVID, the prediction of a pandemic made in 2017 by some Democratic leader, you can look it up, that there will be a pandemic during Trump's presidency when there hasn't been a national pandemic. I mean, I think the swine flu was a pandemic. We just didn't call it that because they control the narrative. Mm-hmm. But according to mainstream media, there has not been a pandemic since 1920 something. So for someone to put something like that out there and then eventually mail-in ballots, mass mail-in ballots are the result of COVID. I mean, I'm not the only person putting that together. And like I said, I'm not even far leaning right. So there are Democrats that are very, very happy that they won, but know that there was no way this was a free and fair election. 100%.
And I believe that the people who push the idea that this wasn't a free and fair election are just viewed upon in our society as crazy and, in an uneducated term, sore losers.
They might be called crazy, but even the people calling them crazy know that it's not crazy. I mean, 3 days ago, 2 days after the election, the New York Post posted an article, and The Hill also posted it, that indoor concerts are now safe. What, all of a sudden?
All of a sudden, it's like
couldn't go to
I've heard this so many times,
and now we can go to concerts.
And I've heard this
2
so
days
many
after an
times
election?
because I've heard this so many times, and it's kind of a funny reference that the fact that we have elections, so that means COVID's over, and that's what people keep believing. And
Well, why wouldn't you believe that? I mean, when President Trump held his rallies, they were, what did they call them, mass spreaders or something?
Exactly.
And now people are standing outside chanting Biden's name, 7,000 deep.
Exactly.
No one's yelling at them. Biden isn't telling them to get back in their house because they're all going to get sick. Exactly. I haven't seen a tweet like that.
And another funny point to bring up, just to keep this show funny, is the fact that I think it was during the debate when Biden tried to press Trump about his rallies, which every single rally he had was held at an airport, and obviously airports are wide open areas. Yes, there was a lot of people. That's because he gained support. And something he said to Biden was, well, the reason there's so many people at my rallies and there's none and your rallies are small is because you can't gain support.
100%.
And I just thought it was funny. The fact that Biden was holding rallies with 12 cars sitting there watching him on a stage while Trump had thousands and thousands of people in each state and airports.
The acceptance speech that he gave the other night, not the one last night, but the one where he had like the cars in front of him at the podium. It was pre-recorded. They started the video before he even got to the podium. The cars were empty. There was no one in the cars. There's
nobody in the car.
So how do you know that Biden did not record that acceptance speech in August?
Well, see, I can't speak on that because I'm not 100% informed, but I do remember staying up that night watching his acceptance speech. It was where it was dark outside. There was cars lined up. He was on a stage, correct?
Yes.
Well, wasn't there cars honking?
Yes, there was the noise of cars honking.
Which I can assume can be edited.
The camera panned one time across the cars, and there was a bunch of people who stilled it. They were all empty.
Yeah. I would have to take a look at that for myself, but I'm not going to sit here and say that, because obviously Biden wasn't my preferred candidate to win, but I believe that our future elections is really just going to be of who can cheat the most.
100%.
And whoever the bigger cheater is going to be the winner. And the fact that we call ourselves a Republican Democratic nation is just absolutely disgusting. But yeah.
When someone can tell you a lie and you'll believe it. I'm sure it's happened to you before in your life. And then they take the lie a little too far and you're like, okay, maybe that first part happened, but the rest of it definitely did not happen. As a registered Democrat, I find it insulting that there is any Democrat in this country that believes that a man who barely left his house during the most crucial election of our lifetime then drew in more voters than the first Black president of this country. To me, that was the lie that took it to a lie that no one believes.
Exactly.
Nobody who was around. I know you were obviously younger when Obama was coming up, especially during his first election, right? Mm-hmm. The second election was not as strong. But when Obama, because he was already president, you already know who you were voting for. But when he, in 2008, when he was first, rallying and running for president, the movement behind him was amazing. Mm-hmm. And whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, it is just a time in your life that you will always be grateful to have been a part of and to have witnessed.
And in my opinion, this is what I believe, that obviously I was young during the Obama campaign, but this is what I view with the Trump campaign, with the amount of people that united under Trump because they weren't electing a politician into office, someone who's going to lie to them and be ineffective and lie just to get their vote. I believe that the unification under Trump in the first election was also something completely astonishing and one of the crucial elections. And I also believe that the record of Hillary with the amount of corruption she had, I believe that, and here's me trying to be nonpartisan in this conversation, even though I have views, but this is something that I believe is true, that going back to the idea of the censorship of the media, that although I don't believe that Joe Biden's completely a perfect angel, I believe that they were trying to pin more corruption on him that might actually have occurred, because I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think Joe Biden is has the brains. I think he's an ill-minded, illegitimate candidate to ever be president.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he's going to be running our country if Trump doesn't win the Supreme Court just leaves me speechless, to be honest. I think
that his son is pretty corrupt and uses his dad's connections to probably do a lot of shady business dealings,
100%.
and I think it came back on Joe.
I
also think that Trump's administration probably knew it was on that laptop a year ago, and they just held on to it and dropped it, hoping that it would have, a positive effect on their voter turnout. It wasn't enough, and Biden supporters don't care. They don't even support Biden. They just hate Trump.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You could have dug up a dead child skeleton in Biden's backyard, and Biden supporters still would have voted for him.
Because of the amount of disapproval on Trump.
Yeah.
But that's what crazes me, because Hillary Clinton was an extremely corrupt individual, and that's why I believe she didn't win the presidency. But we're starting to run out of time here, so I'm gonna pose you with one last question before we bring this to an end. So you say you're a registered Democrat, but you're leaning more to the right. So for 2024, if Biden does retain the presidency, who do you think would be the most effective Republican candidate to put out to eventually take Biden back out of office in 2024? If I didn't clarify.
Candace Owens.
Candace Owens. If you give me a list of top 3, who would you put?
Candace Owens.
Mm-hmm. Could you ever see her running with Ivanka Trump?
She was going to be my second, actually.
Really?
Ivanka Trump.
Do you think Ivanka and Trump Jr. would run together?
No, I don't think Trump Jr. will ever run.
You think he'll just be on the sideline?
Yeah, and I think he likes it there. I can tell by his posts that he doesn't have.
I love his posts.
He probably has no ambition to run.
So you say Candace Owens, Ivanka, and who would your third be?
I don't know.
I mean, obviously, everybody.
I think maybe DeSantis, honestly.
Really? What are your personal
flips? But he always seems to redeem himself. I think he really tries to. Sometimes I think he plays down the middle too much, but I think it's only because he's really trying to make everyone happy.
Yeah, see, I know that DeSantis is a possible candidate. I mean, you always have Tucker Carlson, who, I mean, everybody wishes he could be president, but we'll skip past that.
I asked everyone to boycott Fox News today.
Really?
Mm-hmm. He sent out a tweet that President Trump is looking into starting his own news media company, and that he is going to be a part of it, and that he thinks that Fox News has fallen down the MSM rabbit hole. I mean, that's not what he said. He didn't say rabbit hole.
And the fact that we do
ask everyone to stop watching them, and that to me is a huge deal. That means that something happened at Fox, and Heath said,
the fact that a hardcore conservative can go against his own program that's providing him
correct
economic wealth, to recognize the censorship in the media, and that's something that does keep hope in our country.
Right.
I'm just going to give you my list of top 3. Number 1, I would put Marco Rubio. I believe that he's a very qualified senator from Florida, and I think that he would do a great job as president. I don't think, in my opinion,
sketchy financial issues.
You think he has sketchy financial issues?
I know he has sketchy financial issues, but I think that the left could probably blow it up to more than it really is, and it would look really bad.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from that. I just don't think, I personally can never, in my opinion, as much as I like DeSantis and as much as I dislike DeSantis living in Florida, I don't think I could ever see him being president.
Mm-hmm.
A person that I personally like, but I don't. Okay, actually, number 2, I put Pence. I put Mike Pence to run for president at number 2. I believe that, especially watching the vice presidential debates, I think that Pence is an extremely qualified candidate. The way he, in my opinion, in the vice presidential debate, he put, this might be an inappropriate term here, but he put Kamala down like a sick puppy.
Mm-hmm. I like him too, and I think he's very bright. And I said this to my best friend a couple weeks ago, and she said that he's just not charismatic enough. And I think she's right. I think as a nation, we have such a need to be entertained.
And that's what, and I think that's why Trump did such a successful job in 2016. I believe that he put on a show, and that's why Pence, I think they were the perfect duo. And And I think that he did a great job no matter what anybody. I think he was an extremely successful president in our history.
Mm-hmm.
And I strongly agree with Candace Owens being president. I think that with the way our country's built, she would have a very, very, how do I describe it? She would have a very, with her obviously being a black female, I think she would have a very, I don't know how to describe it. The way I think she
carries a lot of weight. She carries a lot of weight.
She carries a lot of weight, and
black, because she's a woman, because she's intelligent, because she's in a biracial marriage. I mean, she's relatable. Some aspect of her life, and now she's about to be a mother. Some aspect of her life is relatable to so many people.
100%. And then I could see Ivanka Trump running. Someone that I would put out there that a lot of people might disagree with me on, but personally is one of my favorites. I don't think he'll run for president, but I think he would do an astonishing job, is Ben Shapiro. I think Ben Shapiro, in my opinion, one of the smartest.
I love Ben.
He's one of the smartest people on the internet. I know obviously he got some backlash and hate for his description of Cardi B and WAP, but if you look back,
they should have got more heat for that.
I think, but I think that he's a person that, although he is a Jewish male in America who moves towards conservative, he is a person that who can be in the middle and retain his values, and I think he does an amazing job, absolutely amazing job with criticizing the right, criticizing the left for the benefit of the success of our country.
Yeah.
And whether or not, I don't think he'll run for president. I think he's perfectly fine with what he does. And
that's what we used to have. We used to have politicians who weren't afraid to scold both sides, and we don't have that anymore.
Yeah. And that's what, I guess I just have to wait and see what time brings. But I think that's where we're going to end the show. It's an hour and 11 minutes. So thank you for being the first guest on the ABAT show. And thank you for everybody watching. If you could make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The schedule will be out soon. My socials are in the banner. Jaden Abad on Twitter, and obviously the Abad Show on YouTube. Thank you for watching. Once again, thank you for being the first guest. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Bye.
Bye.